My name is Kathy, and I am one of the learning skills specialists here at York University's Learning Skills Services. Today, I want to offer some strategies and tips for how to stay motivated while working from home. I don't have to tell you these are very challenging times we all find ourselves in. Do you remember life before the pandemic? It seems like a whole other lifetime ago, doesn't it? We were all coping with normal March end of term stresses, too much work to do, not enough time. How were you going to get it all done? And then the pandemic hit and everything changed. It felt like almost overnight. Who knew staying home could be so hard? How are you coping? If we were all together in the same room, and I wish we could be, but we can't right now, I'd love to hear from all of you how you're coping. What are your strategies for staying healthy, for connecting with the people that you care about? But the most important thing right now for you is to practice good self-care. Your top priority needs to be your physical and mental health and well-being, while of course physically isolating to flatten the curve and stop the spread of the virus. So we all do need to stay home. It's extra important right now, though, to be kind to yourself and to others. Working from home is hard. I don't know about you. I'm finding it a lot harder than I expected I would. So the question is, how can you stay motivated to get done what you need to get done while working from home? I want to start by talking just a little bit about motivation. What is it? Motivation is that which starts, drives, and continues goal-directed behavior in human beings. It's very changeable and dynamic. Even for the same person, it can vary a lot depending on the time of day, your particular energy level at that time, how much sleep you got the night before, all of those things. How interested are you actually in this task? How important is it to you? So it can change a lot even over the course of a day. It's also different for everyone. Motivation is not something that someone else can give you. Here at Learning Skills, we do try to help you reflect on your motivation and stay connected to it. But really, I cannot give you motivation from outside. It has to come from inside the person. However, motivation is essential for academic success and, in fact, for succeeding at anything that you want to accomplish. It's really important. We have to be motivated to do the things that we want to get done. So we can talk about two main types of motivation. You may have already heard about these if you've studied motivation at all. First, there's extrinsic motivation. That's when the motivation for engaging in a behavior or activity comes from a reward that you hope to get by doing that, or even comes from avoiding a punishment or a bad outcome if you don't do it. So in other words, the reward comes from outside the thing itself. It's extrinsic to it. Then we have intrinsic motivation. This is when we engage in an activity or behavior because we want to. We find it just really personally fulfilling and rewarding. Usually if you have a hobby, or if you're a very creative, artistic person, you love to paint, you play a musical instrument, or you love a sport, those types of activities we usually engage in because we find them intrinsically rewarding. We have a passion for it. We just really want to do it. We love doing the thing itself. So that's intrinsic motivation. Both types are effective. So it's not that one type is good and the other is bad. We also generally operate from a mix of both types of motivation. But I will say that for the kind of deep learning that you want to achieve at university, intrinsic motivation is usually the most effective, and it's also a lot more enjoyable. So what does that mean? Try to study something that you find interesting. I hope you have picked your major and your courses because you do find them interesting. At the very least, when you're studying, try to find something in what you're studying that's interesting to you personally. So, okay, you may be thinking, okay, that's great. It's all well and good to learn the definition of motivation and some things about it. But how does this help me right now when I'm stuck at home with work to do? Well, let's see how we can harness those different types of motivation to help us right now. So let's talk for a minute about intrinsic motivation. Remember that you want this, okay? Remember that you are studying this course, taking this major, you're enrolled in York University for you. You had very good reasons for picking York and for picking the things that you are studying. So try to just consciously remind yourself of that when you are very busy and stressed, because it can help you feel more motivated to remember that you are doing this for you. Another important way to consciously shift your attention into intrinsic motivation is to focus on the learning and not the grade. We talk about this a lot at Learning Skills Services. Grades are extrinsic motivators. I know they're very important, and I know it makes us feel really good if we get a good grade, and there's nothing wrong with that. It can be a good motivator. But the problem if we over-focus on the grade is that can also be very stress-inducing, and it can almost get in the way of your learning. So if you find that you're worrying too much about the performance aspect, about that letter grade or that number grade, try to consciously shift back into the learning itself and remind yourself, I'm just going to focus on learning this right now. Because really, your best defense always in an exam is to know the material and understand it really well, and then the grades will follow. What about extrinsic motivation? Make sure that you reward yourself when you finish a milestone, complete an assignment, hand in a paper, finish an exam. Those rewards can really be very motivating. But you're probably thinking, yeah, they were, but what can I do to reward myself right now? I know it's really tough. The things you would normally do, maybe you'd get in touch with a couple of friends and you'd go out, have a meal at your favorite restaurant, go see a movie, those kinds of things that we all love to do, those are not available to us right now. But doesn't mean you can't reward yourself. You just have to get a little more creative about it. So for those big rewards, finishing a bigger milestone, brainstorm together with your friends. Maybe you can plan a virtual party. I know it's not as much fun as if you could actually get together in person, but you can do that later when all this is over. And a virtual party can still be fun. I'm sure we've all done this, met with friends and people we care about on the screen, seeing their faces. It helps a lot. I know it's not as good as in person, but it sure helps. So brainstorm and come up with some really good ideas for a party to reward you all when you finish those milestones. But don't forget about the smaller rewards day by day either. Find ways to treat yourself. Many of us are baking a lot more than we normally do. Make sure you bake up your favorite cookies and have a nice little treat of some delicious cookies at the end of your working day or when you finish a particular step along the way to a bigger milestone. Also, it's really helpful to buddy up with a friend or a classmate and do video chats, maybe even every day after you finish your working day. Check in. How did it go? You can cheer each other on, and that's so motivating right now. Some other strategies for staying motivated while you are working from home. Very important in these times to create boundaries around your work, to separate out work from leisure. Time boundaries, for example, work really well. Set a working day for yourself. There's that picture of the clocks with 9 to 5, the traditional working day at work. I'm not saying you have to do that. That may not be the best schedule for you. Get to know your personal energy rhythms and set your work times at times when you can focus best. It's also helpful to create sort of space or location boundaries around your work. If you're lucky enough to have a separate office, that's great. That's your workspace. But not all of us are so lucky. Maybe you have a desk, and that's going to be your office for the time being. So make that be the place where you do all your work. But what if you live in a space where you don't even have a designated desk to do all your work at, and you have to do your work in your living room or your bedroom or whatever? You can still try to find ways to separate that working space when you're done working. For a while, I was working in our dining area because I had a good Wi-Fi connection and the light was good. But I found at the end of the day, when I wanted to finish work, if I just left everything there, I would move over to our living space and sit on the couch and look over, see all my work stuff. And then it would make me feel like, oh, I still have that one other task I should be doing. So after just a couple of days, I realized it was much better for me to take my laptop and the stuff I used at work and just move them aside. I covered them up with an attractive cloth that I liked, something pretty. And then when I looked over after my work time was done, I wasn't reminded of work all the time. So even if you have to work in your normal living space, find a way when you're done work to separate your work stuff from your leisure space and time. So important right now as well to create structure and routine around work. It can't be imposed from outside now. You're not physically going to class. So it's really important to structure your day for yourself. Get up at a reasonable time for you, whatever that is. Set the alarm if you need to. And get dressed. Now, okay, getting dressed right now is different from when you were working or going out to class even. Somebody the other day talked about having their day pajamas and their nighttime pajamas. But I find it's helpful to get dressed before you start your work in some way. You don't have to be all that formal about it, but it signals to yourself, I'm now going to move into work mode. Also try to start and stop work at a regular time every day, at least every working day. Also have some days where you're not working, the weekend or whatever, because you want the routine to take over for you, to minimize the number of decisions that you have to make every day. Also, it's very helpful to plan out your tasks. Break things down into manageable separate tasks and bite-sized chunks of work. Here's a to-do list format that you can download from our website. There are many of these. Maybe you use an app on your phone that works for you. It doesn't matter, whatever is effective. But the idea here is to break the task down. Okay, so your first task is not just study math, but specifically, what are you going to cover? What chapter or chapters? What priority does that task have for you? When are you going to do it? And how long do you think it'll take you? Then when you're finished that task, just jot down how long it did take, because that can help you be much more realistic in your planning going forward. Okay, so you're thinking, this is great. Now I know a bunch of ideas and strategies. How do I get myself to actually do it? What about the dreaded P word, procrastination? That can definitely get in the way, especially when working from home. Let's define procrastination. What exactly is it? We can think of procrastination as a needless voluntary delay. And here's a definition from a little book by a psychologist named Timothy Pitchell. It's called Solving the Procrastination Puzzle. And he's written it for students, so it's very readable, lots of helpful strategies and practical suggestions. His definition of procrastination is the voluntary delay of an intended action despite the knowledge that this delay may harm the individual in terms of task performance, or even in terms of how the individual feels about the task or about themselves. So that's interesting. I think the thing to realize here is that it's a voluntary delay, okay? It is something we actually do to ourselves. We may feel like we have no control over it, but it's something we're choosing to do. And it usually stems from the desire to diminish our anxiety in the moment, right this second, bring it down, but at the expense of more anxiety later on. So it's really a self-regulation issue about being able to move through that momentary anxiety, regulate our emotions, because we know that procrastination in the end actually makes it worse. It's going to increase our anxiety down the line. So here are some ideas about overcoming procrastination. The first tip, just start. Okay, maybe you're thinking, well, that's not very helpful. Just do the job. I can't. That's what procrastination is. No, the emphasis here is on the start. Just start. You don't have to do the whole task all at once. Tell yourself, I'm just going to start it. I don't have to do everything. We can usually talk ourselves into doing something small and manageable. So that brings us to the 15-minute rule. That rule is about making the first task on your to-do list being a really small, easy task that'll take you 15 minutes or less. Again, we can often talk ourselves into doing something that's quite doable like that. Another aspect of the 15-minute rule is to tell yourself, I'm only going to work for 15 minutes. Set the timer on your phone. And again, we can usually talk ourselves into just 15 minutes of work. It's not that hard. When the timer goes off, you may well find you're actually now into it and you know you can work further. Even if you can't, maybe you can talk yourself into another 15 minutes. And at the very least, then you'll get a half hour done, which is better than nothing. In talking about procrastination, it's really important to work with your personal energy rhythms. We all have them. When is the best time of day for you to focus? That's when you want to schedule your more difficult tasks. Your willpower is generally higher as well when your energy is higher. Also, vary your tasks, change it up. So if you work at something for a little bit and then you feel, I just can't do this any longer, instead of walking away from work altogether, pick something else on your to-do list that is perhaps quite different as a task and get that done instead. Another tip, get good at using small blocks of time. Often we procrastinate because we don't have a big block of time. You might look at your schedule and think, okay, I have something I have to do in 2 hours, but I have 4 hours of studying, so there's no point. No, even 20 minutes, as I said earlier, even 15 minutes can get something going. And so if you get good at using those small blocks of time, you will get the bigger tasks done because they get done step by step, right? And that's how to get through a large task. Take scheduled breaks to refresh your mind. Go out for a quick walk if you can get some fresh air while also staying safe and socially distanced. And just move away from the work for a few minutes, then come back in again, and you'll be more refreshed and able to do it. There's something called the Pomodoro technique, which you may have heard of. It's a fancy sounding word for a pretty simple concept. As the story goes, the person who first called it the Pomodoro technique had an old-fashioned timer shaped like a tomato. I don't know if you've ever seen these. My mother had one in our kitchen when I was growing up. And it's a mechanical timer that you can set for 10 minutes, 15, an hour, up to an hour, I think. So he would simply set a work time for himself of maybe an hour. And then when it went off, he would set the timer for a 10 or 15 minute break and then do it again. So that strategy, many people use and say it's very helpful. I've used it myself, and I do find it a way to stay on task and get a lot done. There's no magic number. You have to figure out the balance that works best for you. Maybe it's 50 minutes and a 10-minute break. Maybe it's a much shorter time. Maybe you can only focus for 20 minutes and then you need a 5-minute break. Experiment with it and find the time that works best for you. Another strategy, I've talked about this already a little bit with the to-do list, break it down. manageable chunks that you do one by one that are not so overwhelming. Set some interim deadlines as you go along in your tasks with those little rewards we talked about earlier at different stages, and bigger rewards when you complete a larger task. And then you probably will need to adjust as you go on your to-do list. Some things may take longer than you expected. Some things may take less time. So you do need to be a little bit flexible about this. There's no perfect system that's going to work all the time. Don't be afraid to adjust as you go in a reasonable and realistic way. So that sums up what I wanted to say to you today, what I wanted to share about staying motivated and productive during these challenging times of the pandemic. A quick summary just to refresh your memory about what we covered. We talked about motivation in general and the importance of really staying connected to your motivation. Reward yourself. Big rewards for the bigger milestones, smaller ones for the steps along the way. We talked about the importance of putting boundaries around work, especially right now at this time when we are all working from home. And the importance of structure and routine as well to keep us on track. And then finally, we talked a little bit about strategies for overcoming procrastination. Now, if you have a second and a piece of paper near you, or you want to just type up something, I'd like you to just think about the material we've covered and jot down at least one thing, even better, 2 or 3 things we covered that really resonated for you and that you want to follow through on. So just take a moment or two to do that and jot down something you learned today that you want to use and follow through on. So our website, I encourage you to visit lss.info.yorku.ca. We do have a number of resources there, including a tip sheet on online exams, on online learning and studying in general, and many other resources to help you, including the to-do list that you saw in today's workshop. So thank you for watching this video and for being here virtually with me today. I want to wish you all the best in your studies, and please take good care of yourselves. Stay healthy and be kind to yourself. Thank you.